Chandran Nair, the founder and CEO of the Global Institute for Tomorrow, or GIFT, an independent pan-Asian think tank based in Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur, focused on advancing a deeper understanding of global issues. So I'm quite excited to have this, what promises to be a really inspiring as well as provocative discussion. So over to you, Chandran, to kick things off.
It's great to be with the panelists who are on this session. I'm going to take 10 minutes. I think I've been allocated to say a few words. The title that I understand this conference is about is integrating business sustainability impact forums. And I think I was interested because I'd like to disabuses of some of the myths around this idea that business and sustainability are good bedfellows. So that's one of the things I'd like to do. This particular session, as I understand it, is about providing some sort of showcasing practical and achievable pathways towards sustainability. So rather than talk about the work that GIFT does, and we've done over 100 projects in 25 different countries, looking at grassroots policy issues, etc., I would rather talk about the concept of why we created GIFT, and then not do an advertisement for GIFT, but to just say that the whole idea is that the project of the Global Institute is to challenge the current existing narrative around sustainability, and particularly the sort of the mythology that surrounds business schools, suggesting that they have a stake in that sort of future, or even the fact that large companies have sustainability agendas, much of which has been hijacked and morphed into sort of silly, ridiculous things like ESG, etc., much of which has unraveled, as we know, in the last 6 months, particularly in the United States and in Europe. There's a global retreat because none of these companies actually meant anything they said. If you're interested, I was invited by Duke University to Duke CE to write an article around this in their first publication for 2025, and it's called The Great Global Retreat. And my thesis is actually all of this were lies. Nobody believed in any of these things. And as soon as the political environment in America allowed them to take off their masks, they did. And they said, actually, we don't believe in any of this. There's no such thing. But the other problem was that the narrative around sustainability was also one that was steeped in intellectual dishonesty. I come from a science and engineering background, and I wrote a piece. I'm a member of the Club of Rome, if any of you are aware of this organization. And I wrote a piece about 3 years ago saying there is no such thing as net zero. If you come from a science and engineering background, you understand that it's an unscientific myth. And then today, everyone's saying, oh, yeah, it's difficult, etc. Well, it's difficult because there's no such thing. Unless you believe that all these poor countries out there should become your carbon sinks while the industrialized world continues to produce, and we will grow little trees and little things and protect our forests, and they will buy carbon credits. So the case study that I want to talk about is the case for different narratives. And without sounding sort of divisive in terms of East, West, and the rest, I think we need to be very clear that most of the narrative around sustainability is dominated by a Western school of thought. And that Western school of thought is dominated by its preoccupation with such things such as democracy, capitalism, and the freedom of the individual, and the idea that technology will be a panacea for everything. That's the narrative. And many of us in the developing world, are what I call the global majority, having been colonized for a long time, not having our own intellectual foundations on which to define the world, bought into this narrative. This narrative is self-serving. It has no interest, essentially, in a global consensus around anything. So if normally when I speak to people and I say, can you name me prominent as sustainability experts from China and other parts of the world? Very difficult. But they all know, 18-year-old girl from Sweden. Oh, is she from Sweden? I can't remember. But they all know that because that's the Tarzan and Jane story that Western media loves. It's Hollywood, right? And we're the good people. We care. So this is a narrative that I think is just as important and very important to understand that the idea that somehow NGOs and small initiatives and dare I say even social impact funds and all of that would change the trajectory of the existential threats we face is also deception. It's essentially got to be policy. Why? Because sustainability is essentially about political objectives. We can see this in the United States. As soon as a new administration comes in, they are able to change that. They are dismantling in the United States what they think is, too much woke stuff, and they're doing whatever they want. So we have to understand its essentially political objectives. Australia is a classic case too, where political objectives essentially determine what the narrative will be. And then there's the media narrative that Australians care, but most people will know, those who care, to look into the facts that Australia, in terms of the ecological footprints of homes, is one of the highest in the world. I think 10 years ago, I think Perth was the highest in the world. The responsibility of the largest mining companies in Australia in terms of contribution to climate change and emissions, some of the highest in the world. Yet the media narrative is we care, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing, the most important thing to understand is that the challenges we face and which intellectually we have to accept is that the economic model that we are all either buy into, business schools promote without questioning, is essentially at the core of the problem. And the core of the problem is the economic model is premised on promoting relentless consumption. Buy things you don't need with money you have, which is the debt issue, which is then related to how tariffs work or don't work. And I've done a series of talks recently about Donald Trump, without probably appreciating it, has actually done the world a favor by his tariff war, disproportionately and politically driven, but essentially telling us that we can't. It should be a wake-up call for the world that you can't consume your way into economic prosperity. And he recently did an interview which I thought was very funny. The people who hate him were questioning him about, oh my God, there'll be no toys for American kids come Christmas. And he says, well, they don't need 300 kids, 300 toys, they just need 3. And he's damn right about that. But that's a consumption issue. So I think we have to understand the economic model that we've all bought into is essentially at flaw because it relies on promoting relentless consumption, externalizing true costs. That's why your mobile phone is so cheap. And then we all complain about, oh my God, the poor Africans, and all of this. And then we do a bit of social impact to help poor Filipinos and Indians, etc. So that's the first thing to understand. The second thing to understand is companies are not evil, but they're not driven by providing public goods. You can't tell Pizza Hut to sell less pizzas. You can regulate them. You can regulate them to essentially remove certain processed ingredients from the food and things like that. You can't tell agricultural companies to essentially remove PFAs unless you regulate. Who fights regulations? The supposedly good guys of the large corporations. You can't tell me that Coca-Cola and McDonald's essentially are sustainability believers, etc. They're purveyors of junk food, period. I mean, you might like junk food, but it's junk food. And it's no good for kids, it's no good for us. So trying to essentially create narratives. I mean, dare I say the business schools have done this too much and are actually the enemy of the truth. Is essentially intellectually dishonest. So that's what we have tried to do, to say, we have an existential threat. What are we going to do about it? So I'll finish my remarks by saying, the Western narrative needs to be rejected by the global majority. And why? For the simple fact that the majority in the world cannot and should not aspire to have economic models based on overconsumption. America is the godfather of this, where obesity is uh, out of control. Everything you can imagine is out of control because big and better is essentially worshipped there. You can't tell the majority of the world, the 8 billion people, or today it's 8.1 billion, but the majority of the world is about 6 billion people. The Western world is about 15% of the world, to essentially now copy and ape that economic model. But that's what we're told. That's what they teach in the business school, Harvard Business School, and all of that. It's fiction. So we have to do something else. And what we do cannot depend on the activities of academics working in silos or even social impact funds. It has to be steeped in a different political narrative. And that's what we are interested in. So I wrote a book. My first book was on consumption. And here again, I'm not trying to advertise, but that was the first book written that unless we understand we have to curb consumption, we will not deal with the existential threats. And CO2, greenhouse gas, is just tip of the iceberg. Second, we have to understand that in the majority world, the idea that democracy and freedoms can be unfettered, that the individual can have 5 cars, is essentially a lie, because if you are to deal with climate, water, land use, etc., you're going to have to redefine what people can have. This is anathema in Western democracies. It can't happen. So I've argued, car ownership is not a human right. Neither is a swimming pool in an arid area. But try telling that to Americans, the guns come out. So you have to understand the political narrative. And I'll conclude by therefore saying that in our part of the world, Africa, Middle East, we have to essentially reject that narrative around what is progress, what is prosperity, and what is sustainability. And then understand that the majority of our people, if you take India, for instance, the majority of people don't have the right to the basic rights. That provision of the basic rights is a fundamental objective of the state and obligation. They'll have to provide that. But if they provide it following the economic mainstream global systems, they will destroy much of the world. So I've argued that 6 billion people in Asia in 2050, aspiring to live like Americans and Europeans, will destroy the world. We have to do something very, very different. And that's the narrative that I think we need to have. And I come here to share that rather boldly, but to say that institutions of learning need to essentially also have new curriculums, which are not steeped in hocus pocus, intellectually dishonest narratives, and just purveying it without looking at the science. The science will tell you very clearly we can't have all of these things.